What's up guys, I hope you're doing alright. In today's video I'm going to share with you 3 more presets here for the electric violin. This video is one of a set of 4, so if you enjoyed this video make sure you check out the others when you're done here. But in this video we're just going to be focusing on 3 different sounds using the Helix amps and effects. And basically we're going to go for a clean sound that is pretty much good for any basic application. Something mildly overdriven, again really good for most any application, and then something really high gain, which I would imagine you would only play in like a hard rock or metal scenario. But there are 3 sounds that I really dig, and I've been using them a lot. I've been spending a lot of time fine-tuning them. And so we're going to jump on HX Edit in a second, and I'll show you everything that's going on. Alright, so the first preset we're going to look at is a totally clean sounding patch. We're using the Jazz Chorus model with a 2x12 cabinet, different than the normal Jazz Chorus cabinet, but I'll get into all this in a second. As always, set the input impedance for the first step of your preset. Figure out what works best for your violin, what sounds the best. I go with 90K, and then switch over to pull up the parametric EQ block, and you can steal these settings here. I've got a low cut. This is essential for getting rid of some of that annoying bass bow noise that's happening. Let's see if I can mute all these real quick and you can hear what it sounds like without that patch. What's going on here? Alright, so if you've got headphones on or good speakers, you're going to hear a very low thumping, kind of in the bass drum range. And you can hear how this EQ not only shapes the sound, but gets rid of that annoying low range thumping that happens when you change bow strokes. So what this does, it also cuts out some of the highs over here. We've got a high cut at 12.5 kilohertz, and this gets rid of extra stuff that we don't need. There's some information the violin produces up there, but it's not really useful, so I just cut it all out. I also do a little bit of work with the 3 bands, the low, high, and mid frequencies. I cut the mids quite a bit, 9 decibels. At the 3K hertz range, and this is just kind of getting rid of a weird, like, very directional, annoying frequency that this violin tends to have. I don't know if every violin's going to have it, but that works for me. So play around a little bit with that, the EQ settings, and find out what's the best for your violin. Basically what this EQ block is doing is it shapes the sound a little bit and it sends it into the amplifier in a second here, so that the amplifier can work as well as possible with the violin. You're going to notice a lot of the settings. If you play guitar anyway, you're going to notice a lot of the settings seem kind of weird, and that's because we're working with a guitar-centric device, and we're trying to make it work as best we can for violin. So we're going to do some odd stuff. Both of these blocks are always on, by the way, the EQ and the compressor. So pull up the deluxe comp, and then threshold, ratio, attack, release. These are my levels for that. And we'll get into what all these foot switches are doing in a second. Let's turn on the amp block now and we'll hear what the basic tone of this first preset sounds like. Just a pretty basic sound that I think is going to work for a lot of different genres. So here's the settings for the Jazz Chorus, the amp block. I set the master not all the way up. I know the Jazz Chorus is not a master volume amp, but I think it sounds better for violin, so I leave that at 7.5. I usually, with going for a clean sound, I set the drive as high as I can get it without getting really much breakup at all. You're going to hear a little bit of clipping, but that's alright. I don't think that really gets noticed by the audience. And again, we'll talk about these foot switch things in a second. And then finally for the cabinet, low cut at 90 hertz, and then 11.5 kilohertz for the high cut. Distance 3 inches back, and the 67 condenser microphone. So let's jump over to the first effect here. This is triggered with foot switch 1, by the way. And if you like this chorus sound, you can just take it and apply it to any of your other presets you've made for the violin. I think it sounds pretty cool. Here's clean for comparison. I think it's a pretty cool chorus sound. I use a volume block always on all my presets, so that's just sitting there. And then I've added a little bit of a plate verb to it. This is like a very long form, a very long tail to the reverb, but I keep the mix real low, so you really won't notice it too much in a band setting. just a normal reverb, really. I think it sounds great. So finally, moving on to the foot switches. What we've got here is foot switch 3 for me, for my presets. I always set that as a solo boost, so around 6 decibels, and you can get that in different ways. I put a little bit of a level boost here, 5 decibels in the cabinet block, and then I add a little bit of brightness in the amp block and a little bit of mids in the amp block, quite a bit of mids actually. So by combining all 3 of these, it's not only going to help you boost and raise the volume of the violin, it's actually going to shape the sound a little bit so you can cut through the mix better too. If you add mids to your sound, it's going to help you pop out in a very full band texture. So foot switch 3, these are the settings for that. I'll give you a little sample. Noticeably louder, right? Foot switch 1 for chorus, like I said. Foot switch 2 is going to be a little bit of shaping to the sound. You can get a little bit different tone by using this, and I've done this in the compression block. So I'm changing the level with foot switch 2 now. So from the minimum level of +1 decibel going up to 10 decibels, and then the threshold is changing too. So it's going to be the same volume, hopefully. If you play very lightly, you're going to experience a little bit of a volume boost, but you can adjust that with the level. So maybe lower the level a little bit. But this is how it's going to change your sound a little bit. If you're playing really percussively, maybe if you're doing pizzicato, this might be useful. It'll make your violin sustain a little bit longer. Let's play with it off first. And then with a little bit more compression. Off again. So that's something that's going to be really helpful if you're doing pizzicato passages. So hopefully this preset is useful to you in some way. Let's jump over to the second one here. We've got a little bit more high gain sound. Again, if you're going to cop this preset, take the input impedance, figure out what sounds best for you, and set that first. So for this EQ block, it's the same exact settings as before. I don't need to go into it again. If you've created the first preset, you can actually copy and paste this block from the last one into your new preset here. We'll get to the wah block in a second. What I need to talk about is when you're adding distortion to your violin, if you want to, keep the very full sound of your instrument and not get too crazy with the overtones and everything, a good idea is to split your signal and then combine it again at the end. So what we're doing here is basically making 2 paths. This is called parallel routing. So we've got the regular signal, right, just in one path at the beginning here, and then we're going to split it to one side with the amp block. This is where we're adding some overdrive, and then we're going to keep the other block clean. I've added a little bit of an EQ here to manipulate the sound, and then we're going to join them back together. And what this does is it keeps the clear sound running with the distortion at the same time, and it blends them back together. Whereas before you'd have all your tone running through the distortion block, and that's not exactly the sound that I was going for here. It might be useful to you, but this is what I like to do. I like to run it in parallel. So we're using the Grammtico Bright amp. This is like a Fender Tweed copy, and these are the settings for this. It's on the bright setting, so the normal drive actually doesn't really affect it much, but I found that if I put it higher, then I wasn't getting as much distortion from the bright channel. I don't know how to explain that. I don't know why it's like that, but it is. So if I raise the drive on the normal channel, the bright is affected also. Kind of weird. And then the EQ settings. It's kind of weird. It doesn't have a mid control. I think the tone is shaping which frequency the mid notch is at, which is a cool idea. So I settled on 3.9, and we'll be changing that again with foot switch 3 when we add in the boost later. I'll get to that in a second. The master volume here. Some people are confused by channel volume and master volume. This is supposed to be simulating a tube amp, like a full preamp and power amp section of a tube amp. So the drive is affecting the preamp tubes, and the master is actually affecting the power amp tubes, the tubes that are actually doing the amplification here. So the higher the master is set, the more power amp tube saturation you're getting. Channel volume is literally just a master volume. It's funny, the names of these two effects should be switched. And then I've set sag a little bit lower from half. I'm not sure if you could really hear the difference if you raised it. But this is what I thought sounded good. I raised the bias a lot because I thought I got a more desirable distortion out of it if I raised the bias controls. And then for the cabinet, we've got a 1x12 Cali 4. This is like a Victory cab sim, if you know what a Victory amp sounds like. And then we've got a 160 ribbon mic for it, distance right up on the cab, and then a bit of a low cut and a bit of a high cut on it also. And then here's the EQ block I'm running in parallel. This, it's not going to sound good on its own really, but it kind of helps fill in the places where the sound is missing from this side of the chain. So this is just kind of to make up what the amp block is missing. So let's combine them together actually, and we're going to isolate the amp block. So we're hearing just the dry amp sound at this moment. Let's turn the reverb off too. And then let's hear what the EQ sounds like. Again, not exactly a pleasing sound, but it works well, I think, when you combine them in parallel. And the reverb block is the same from before. I've just lowered the decay just a tad. Alright, now talking about the wah effect that I put on this block. I tuned the high and the low frequencies a little bit to fit the sound of the violin more. By the way, the wah is triggered with foot switch 1, which at the same time will deactivate the volume block. So your expression pedal now becomes a wah pedal. So I've manipulated the low and the high filters for this wah patch to kind of work as best as possible for violin, and I've moved the mix to 80%. That's a really nice feature about the wah stuff in the Helix, is that you can play with the mix feature a little bit, so we get some of the dry tone passing through. Sorry, I'm not much of a rock player, but hopefully that wah patch would be useful to you if you decide to try out this preset. By the way, I should mention that this is how I'm blending the levels here. This is a big deal also. So I'm taking the EQ block down -7 decibels and boosting the amp block a little bit at +3 decibels. And that's kind of where I'm getting the balance here between these two channels. Alright, and then finally talking about the foot switch for 2 and 3 again. So 2 is going to be shaping the sound a little bit, so we're getting a bit of a different tone out of this patch. So really you've got 2 options for tone. The one that comes stock, where you saw the settings already, and then if you set up foot switch 2, you can get a bit of a different sound out of it. So foot switch 2 is going to be affecting bass like this. We're going to be losing a little bit of bass when we trigger this, changing the drive a little bit, and then also with the normal function again. Remember how I said they're kind of interactive? And then finally the level of the simple EQ block, the clean sound. So let's hit foot switch 2 and we'll see how it sounds different. I'm going to play the stock sound real quick just so you have a reminder of what it sounds like. A little bit more gain, a little bit less bass maybe. So just something you can play around with, decide which one sounds better for your violin, depending on the venue, or if you want to change sounds mid-set, that can be useful to you as well. And then finally, foot switch 3 is, again, a solo boost. So a little bit of mids added in there, changing the tone a little bit, and obviously the master block, where we're getting some of the boost from and the channel volume. So this is just a way to get a added boost. All right, and then finally moving on to the third and final preset. Again, set your input impedance. This is going to be using the Revv Gen Red amp block, which is new for 2.8. So if you don't have this in your Helix unit, you're going to need to update to 2.8 to be able to use this. This was a new amp for that generation of software. So again, the same EQ block as before. And then I've got a cool phaser sound here, and we're going in parallel again. So I'll just blow through this real quick. Here's the settings. With this one, I thought it sounded better actually using hardly any power tube saturation. So we're getting most of it from the preamp section. and this is a really high gain sound, even though it's only at 4.5 out of 10, obviously. And I play around with these controls a little bit, and this is just what I thought sounded the best. Again, I set the bias a little bit higher to get a different character of overdrive out of it. And then for the cabinet, 1x12 lead 80 cabinet, 160 ribbon, distance 3 inches, and then here's the low cut and the high cut. All right, and then for the accompanying EQ block, a little bit different than before. I added in a lot more highs here because I thought it was the amp block was missing that. So I've added in plenty more highs. And then we're going to combine them together here. -4 decibels for the EQ, the dry sound, and +4 decibels for the distorted tone. All right. I'm using the same reverb block again as the second preset here. This is a very noisy preset, by the way, so I should mention that I added a little bit of a noise gate here. So if you're just holding your violin in the middle of a song, that you're not going to be creating all this extra hiss and weird noise that's happening with all the compression that's in this block. So I added a little bit of a noise gate there. I'm going to add in the phaser patch, which is triggered by foot switch 1, and this is what this sounds like. So looking at foot switch 2, what we're changing with this patch with foot switch 2 is we're adding a whole ton of drive. I changed the master a little bit with that, and it just gives us a different character of sound again. So here's the first, the primary one, and then I'll add in, when I hit foot switch 2, you'll hear the different sound. So if you want to compare those, if you're playing a picked passage, versus the first version, which has less gain. It dies away much quicker. So there's just two different sounds there you can use. And then again, for foot switch 3, it's the solo boost. Here's how I'm changing that. So there's the 3 presets for you. I hope my C major pentatonic scales didn't bore you too much. I'm not much of a rock violin player, but I'm trying to get into it. I spent a lot of time developing these presets, and I'm sure I'm going to change them a little bit more as time goes on in the future. Stay tuned for plenty more violin presets coming out real soon. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I've got many more electric violin tones coming out, so if you're interested in those, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Helps me out a little bit as well. And I've had people reach out and say they'd much rather prefer to have the .hlx files to download. My presets are always free, and they're always going to be free, but people have reached out and said they'd be perfectly willing to donate in return for those files. So if instead of tediously stealing the settings from your screen, you'd rather just download them straight to your unit, I have information in the description for how you can get my complete Helix preset pack. Basically, it's a one-time donation of any amount. Most people donate about $5, and it's just instant access to my forever growing library of Helix presets for both guitar and violin, by the way. So if you play guitar, this could be useful for you as well. So if you're interested in that, you can find more information below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.